Right, well, it's time for our big conversation, and today is World Press Freedom Day. Ghana has historically done very well in the press freedom rankings. This year we fell by 4 places. We want to talk about that, but also we want to revolve our conversation around the theme, which is, the role of the press in elections and democracy. But we want to ask a very important question about how the press is doing as the 4th estate of the realm. Do the other 3 estates treat us as the 4th? Do the people of Ghana consider us to be the 4th arm of government? And do the press do what it takes to earn that position as the 4th estate? My guests today are my 2 seniors. My senior from St. Augustine's, Ken Ashigbe, is the CEO of the Ghana Chamber of Telecommunications, and he is here with my senior in the media, lawyer Zakaria Tanko Musa, who is also a lecturer at the Ghana Institute of Journalism. It's very good to see you both.
Good to see you too.
Thank you so much for making it. All right, well, Press Freedom Day, and it's fascinating. It's about the freedom of the press, right? But today the theme is more focused on what the press does with that freedom. So I want to start with you, Mr. Tanko. You sit in a unique position. You train people who end up in the media, in the press. How are you assessing our performance and our use of this freedom that we seem to have a lot more of than other countries?
Thank you. I think we've come a long way. A very, 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 very long way. From the days when it was almost impossible for you to exercise that fundamental right. Because I always say to people that, you see, the reason why it becomes increasingly difficult to try and curtail the press freedom is because it is linked to one of the fundamental human rights, which is freedom of expression and speech. And so because of that, it becomes very difficult for you to want to control it. But nevertheless, in the past, attempts have been made and people succeeded in curtailing that freedom. And that affected the confidence of the media. But since 1992, when we had an enhanced, if you like, recognition in chapter 12 of the Constitution, which talks about freedom and independence of the media, and more or less made it very difficult for any political actor to directly now try and interfere with the freedom and independence of the media. So you would really be naive as a politician or a political actor to be seen to be directly interfering. So what they do now is to try and look for indirect ways. So looking at those antecedents and where we are now, and even look at the media plurality and look at the boldness with which the media is doing its work now, and a lot of the exposés. And that's what I say to people who always try to ask the question, what does the media do for us? And I say, but for the media, a lot of the things that have come into the public domain that had led to our monies being retrieved, that had led to policies being changed, that had led to people now taking, or more or less being worried about whether they're going to be exposed or not, is by and large as a result of the activities of the 4th estate of the realm, which is the media. So we have really come very far. We have been putting the spotlight on people who we have given the responsibility to manage our resources and national architecture. But it doesn't mean that we have almost done everything that we have to do. There's still more room for improvement. And that room for improvement partly has to come from policy, partly has to come from us as media. And I think the training institutions where I'm coming from also have a huge role to play, because the media landscape worldwide has changed. The dynamics have changed, the way the business is done is changed, and then the platforms have changed, and the challenges and opportunities are looking increasingly different. So we have to be alert to that and try and match it with what it is. And I think that is what we need to be looking at.
Do you think the right people get attracted to the profession? In other parts of the world, you will see somebody who already has a certain area of expertise. You're a lawyer, Ken is an engineer. So somebody with a certain area of expertise would then, for whatever reason, be interested in the profession of journalism and then come and train on on that, and then they become an expert in their field, working as a journalist. Somehow you can see how that enhances their ability to do their job. We don't get that being the general trend here in Ghana, do we?
That's the tragedy. That's the tragedy where, when you look at, I think it's partly because of the antecedents of how journalism is practiced. If you look at the practice of journalism, there has been this, you know, if you like, century-old argument about who is a journalist. Whether do you need to go to a formal journalism training school to be recognized as a journalist or not. And when you look at across the world, some of the accomplished journalists have not really sat in any journalism school. So because of that, the people coming into journalism come into journalism either, frankly, as a result of accidents. Some people too see it. I mean, from our days, about 20 years ago, some people come to the journalism school because maybe they didn't get the opportunity to go to their first choice university and all those things. But that trend is changing now. It's changing now because you have people who are purposely deciding that I want to be a journalist, I want to go to journalism school. But what we don't have is that exactly what you said, where you have people who are already experts in another field coming to do journalism so that they can specialize in that area. So engineering reporting, health reporting, legal reporting. That is an area where we don't have. But frankly, being somebody who had practiced journalism and being a lawyer, I realized that that perspective really enhances what I do and my appreciation of some things. And I think that is something we should encourage people to go into.
Okay. Ken, you know, recently on social media, I think some media house had goofed, you know, put up a story that turned out not to be entirely accurate or something. And people were commenting about it. And one person's comment was, you see what they're doing, and they want us to give them the right to information bill. You know, it just brought back, you know, the struggle to explain to the people of Ghana the role of the media and the fact that we are their eyes and ears, and that a right to information bill is not for the media, but it's for them, so that they can have more information, not so that we can. But I wanted to use that as a, you know, the pivot to ask about how you assess the people of Ghana's appreciation of the work of the media.
Well, it's quite interesting, because if you look at the last Afrobarometer research that they did, you know, people, and they were asking the question about the criminal libel law and the repeal of it. Increasingly, a few more Ghanaians were beginning to think that they bring even that back, because they thought that journalists were also becoming dictatorial and were becoming reckless in the way we're doing things. So you have that, you know, you have those people as well, and you have those perceptions that people have. But if you want to see the way journalists treat Ghanaian treat journalism, just look at the way we handle emergencies. Ask yourself, when there's an emergency, who do journalists, Ghanaians call? They won't dial the 911. They would call a radio station, they would call a TV station, they would make the report. You know, if you want to go to social media, you know, so I like using empirical evidence. Take other even take the three other estates of the realm and look at their presence on social media. What is their following? Compare that with the big brands, you know, of the fourth estate and see what the following is, you know. So in one breath, a few of them would say, oh, these journalists have become too much. But when they have issues, that's where they fall on. And in another breath as well, you know, if you see all the things that especially the underprivileged get to benefit from the media and some of the things that the media do. And you know that, as the lawyer was saying, that pivotal things that the media are doing, you know, a typical one is, if you take even the child and mother hospital in Kumasi, you know, that's fundamental. You know, even this issue about vigilantism and where it's come from, what really brought it up. So our development as a country and the benefits that Ghanaians have gotten out of, you know, the media has been great. You know, for me, I'm a student of elections in this country. I covered, you know, I started covering in 96, but I started working even in 92. And you found out that if you look at it, the reason why our elections have generally been free is because of what journalists do when it comes to elections. And, you know, because we would follow it from the campaign all the way to the elections proper and monitor it, you know, we call the elections and all of that, so that even it makes it difficult for even the loser, you know, to come out and really challenge, because everybody would have seen it. So yes, there are, like any human institutions, you know, the errors that are made, and so you find people complain, and sometimes it's very true. They forget that, and that the work of the media is tied to their freedom of expression, you know, and so the tendency is for them to come at the media. But look at it. If you go back and even look at that particular comment, you will find out that it will be coming from somebody who is politically aligned. And so when, you know, they are in opposition, you know, they are the lovers of the media. When they get into power, then immediately they start, you know, changing their speak. But if you take the generality of Ghanaians, I believe they appreciate the work that, you know, journalists do, but definitely they see some of the faults that come with, you know, what we do as well. So you would have that coming. But by and large, I think generally, if you did a poll, you know, Ghanaians would say that the fourth estate of the realm would have done better, more good than evil. And I'm sure if you put that on the same scale with the other estates, I'm pretty sure we might do better than any of them would do, though we don't have all the resources and opportunities that the other three estates have.
I mean, you mentioned the Afrobarometer report, and I had a glance through the bit about the media, and I was just as you know, intrigued by it as you were. There was that question about whether the media should be allowed to, you know, basically report on whatever they want, or whether there should be some restrictions. And there was an increased number of people who thought there should be restrictions. And yeah, I was fascinated by that. It suggested to me that, like you said, perhaps people think that the press has too much freedom. But is there even such a concept? Despite, we do have some excesses, but is there such a concept as too much freedom of the press?
Well, I'm sure if you did a theoretical academic analysis of it, yes, there would be, you know, because there could be dictatorship of the media as well, and there'll be the tendencies of that happening. But if you look at the balance of it, you know, so you look at the opportunity cost of the free media and the absence of it. And we've had, you know, experiences in the past, you know, when we had a culture of silence, and what really, you know, could happen. They could come pick you up, you know, from your home. Nobody would speak anything about it, compared to some of the things that we're beginning to see. Sometimes I even think that some of the crimes that we complain about now, as if the incidence is high, it's just because of now the plurality of the media and the fact that in every nook and corner of this country, you know, people have access to the media, and we encourage, you know, the conversations to happen. But we should, as journalists and as media practitioners, we should also know that for every freedom that has given to us, there are responsibilities to it. And the challenge we've had as an industry is the fact that there was no transition between the time when, you know, media was not free to the time where it was free. So even in terms of the various media houses and the media training institutions to be able to provide the human resources to man a lot of the opportunities that came, really we did not have that. You know, you got a lot of people get into journalism who did not even have, you know, go through proper apprenticeship or even go to school to go and study, you know, and they were not working under, you know, virtually the people who were running the media house themselves might all not be people who had gone through any tutorship. So we have some of those people with us, and, you know, so the tendency to abuse the powers that we have, you know, let me take some of them examples, like you know, the way we even handle our news, where, you know, maybe there might be a rape victim, and the way we sensationalize it, you know, triple and, you know, quadruple multiple times, keep on raping and inflicting pain on those people, and so all of those things happen, and we need to really deal with it. Another major problem we have, which applies to people like myself who run media, but who run media in the past and who are continuing to run media, is the business models. As lawyer says, the environment has changed. So we are not able to attract that kind of journalist who would be a specialist and come into journalism, because what is the advertising envelope in Ghana, and what is the share that comes into the media? And, now you have the big three, the Googles, the Facebooks, and all of that taking a huge chunk of the revenues that are coming in the new media space. How are we evolving so that we'll be able to pay these top professionals and bring them in? And I'm also of the school of thought that maybe journalism should be, taught as a second degree program rather than the first. So we get the sharp people coming in, and then we train them in, but to be able to do that, we need to change our business models. Our businesses, our media businesses are so fragmented. They're so small, some of them pretend to be businesses, not paying their taxes, not paying their staff, and then their staffs also pretend to be working for them, so all they have to live on is when they go out, collect little things to be able to survive. And that has to change. There should be some consolidations that will have to happen in the business so that we pay our people well. It's interesting, this day is coming just after we've had, midday, where we're talking about workers, because when it comes to that, some of the workers, some class of workers that are poor, the most poorly paid, are journalists. And how would you expect them to be able to give the best that they could when, you're paying people below the minimum wage? So there are bits of those things that we need to balance. But I think to a very large extent, the Ghanaian appreciates what the media does for them. But the thing about human beings, when you have it, you don't see it till you've lost it. Let's give a week where they decide that all of these freedoms are curtailed, then you see what would happen to all of us.
Indeed. Now, sorry.
I just wanted to touch quickly on the concept of absolute freedom. Now, we elected for ourselves a constitution, and now the constitution has made it clear. I think there are very limited instances or circumstances where freedom would be absolute. It would always be qualified, and that very document would define how that qualification has to be used. The challenge is that sometimes political actors want to define how that qualification should be, and it is not down to them, because they are interested parties in these issues. And it is not surprising that the legislature and then the executive would always find issues with the media, because the media are almost always putting them on the spotlight and exposing their activities. But there is no way that freedom would be absolute. It's qualified, and the media is alive to those responsibilities. But yes, as Senior Ashibe said, there are always those excesses. And I think partly it's because of the way we have taught journalism in the past. Because when you look at the concept of code of ethics, it is to make it easy for the journalists to behave and operate responsibly. But I have just recently looked at the way code of ethics even is taught, and it's so theoretical. So you tell the journalists that do not expose the identity of victims of sexual assault. What does that mean in principle? What does that mean in practice? And one of the interesting things that I did with my students in my media law and ethics course recently is that I asked them to take the GJA code of ethics one by one and look at where instances of the breach of that ethics is also a breach of the law. And most of the time they don't realize that. Because you see, ethics is not law, and so sometimes some journalists will say, I can breach it and nothing will happen. There will not be any legal consequences. But frankly, when you look at the code of ethics critically and do a critical analysis of them, you realize that a breach of them is also a breach of the law. And so, and you start teaching people to come to terms with this, you realize that we'll become increasingly responsible, and we will not play into the hands of the political actor. Because when you start being unethical, you play into the hands of the political actor, who then plays to the gallery and say to the people that, you see, they are being irresponsible, so let's regulate them. And the politician will not regulate in the public interest. You regulate to have more power and authority. And as soon as we start going down line, that's a big problem.
Indeed. Right. Now, I want us to make this more of a discussion, so feel free to chip in your thoughts at any point. I'll moderate as necessary. But let's talk now about politics and the press. So the concept is that in a democracy, the press is the fourth arm of government, the fourth estate. Now, in the executive, everybody's political affiliation is known, and it's the same, you know, in our country anyway. You don't tend to have ministers coming from the other side of the aisle. In Parliament, everybody's affiliation is known, and there is some sort of division, you know, majority to one side, minority to the other. In the judiciary, it is not known. And in fact, it is desired that a judge's political affiliation not be known, or any operator in the judiciary's political affiliation not be known. In the media, in the press, there is a certain desire to know. It's almost as if you can't quite trust what's coming out of the mouth of the journalists unless they have declared which side they belong to. And we know about 65% or so of media houses in this country are owned either by government or people in politics. So I'm wondering, where should the media sit itself in terms of political affiliation, and how difficult is it for a media person or a media house to do their job once their political affiliation is known?
Well, okay, yeah. So the interesting thing is all of us would vote, even the electoral commissioner, I'm pretty sure would vote. Yeah. You know, he either would vote for one party or the other, or decide that he won't cast his vote. But we all have, you know, our political affiliation. I think the challenges that have happened, one is the fact that allowing political access to own media houses, and we have seen that the tendency for them to use it for very parochial partisan, you know, interest. And in this country, fortunately for us, we just had the NDC and the NPP. We've had situations where one of the media sites affiliated to the NDC has pushed that to the brink when it comes to elections. Some calling people onto the streets. We've seen that with the NPP as well. And to the extent that we now have the situations where even in some media houses that are not partisan in the way they do their things, and newsrooms are divided along partisan lines. And you know, if you go into the state's own media, one of which I've run before, you tend to see that, you know, divide and conflict within the newsrooms, and the tendency for it to affect what it is that we do. There's nothing wrong with being partisan. You know, the most important thing is for us to be professional in the way we do our things. So, you know, you go into other places where, you know, some media houses come out and they say this is their, especially in places where ideology works, you know, so they push the ideology. But for us in Ghana, really, there's no ideology. Our ideology tend to be tied to, you know, our tummies, you know, and where we will get, you know, that's where, you know, and that makes it, yeah, terminology, you know, I mean? So that's what makes it very difficult, you know. So when the person is even espousing a particular position, he's just pushing a partisan interest. And most of the time, the next 4 years, the next election interest, that is what we're pushing. It's not to say that I believe, you know, in this particular ideology, and I think that in terms of economic theory, we want to go on this particular angle and pushing that, you know, you don't tend to see that. It's just that how can I do such that then one of the ends, you know, would win the next election or will lose the next election. And that is what tends to happen. And we allow that to then color our ability to be ethical in the way of doing our things. We see some journalists who we know come from a particular point, but they would make their arguments from a point, you know, of information, not just trying to outdo or, you know, the other person. And then we then tend to use the power that the media gives us to the disadvantage of our opponents, you know. So situations where they would come at you just because you have espoused a position that they think is inimical to the next 4 years' interest of their party, and we use that, and that tends to be one of the challenges that we have, you know. So we need, because I'll give you a typical example of a journalist who now has become a minister for information. When Kojo was, you know, running the morning show, do a content analysis of that. He was very professional at the way he did it. You know, so that really is not a problem. The problem is not being partisan. It is what you do with your affiliation. And most of the time, it's even those who tend to hide it, you know, and you will find out that they will hit one area at the one time and then they will hit, and all of that, they are doing it for somebody to just get the next 4 years, you know, and that tends to be what is the problem. So the most important thing is for our journalists to be professional and also not to become pawns in the hands of these people who own media houses. And
should journalists declare their position though? Their political affiliation?
Maybe I'll let it go.
See, I think declaring isn't really the issue, because you don't go out asking other people from other professions to declare their interest. Why the journalists? The only reason why we've been given that privileged position in the Constitution is because, as you said earlier on, we are the eyes and ears of the public. That is the only reason. It's not because we are clever or something, or we are different species. But the most important thing is to be professional. Now, when you are professional, it means that when issues come out, you could still take a stand, but you also have to give the other party the opportunity to put out the information. And you see, this is why I always say, you know, this right to information. The journalist has a responsibility there as well. When you have information, the public have the right to know, the right to have access to information. So when you have information that you are putting out there, just because the information might not inure to the benefit of the political ideology you share, doesn't mean you don't put it out there. You can still put it out there and look for whatever counter information that you want to put out there. I think when we are able to balance these things and do the balance, and sometimes even now, the concept of objectivity in journalism is really taking a back. And what is objectivity? But you need to be open and transparent and have the humility to admit when you are caught up and you do a mistake, and to say, yes, this is a thing, but don't mix your personal opinion based on political affiliation and make it as if it's a factual thing. I think that's the problem. But I think there's nothing wrong with journalists taking a stand. But when you take the stand, at least you need to let people know that this is my stand, but let me give the other party the opportunity to put up. And you see, the issue about politicians owning media houses and all those things, some people are arguing that, well, they are Ghanaians, they are entitled to do that. But the transparency and openness in the way they acquire the licenses is what it is. Sometimes you don't even know who they are, and they hide behind this semblance of neutrality when they are not neutral. And it is very interesting. And that is why earlier on, when Mr. Ashigbe talked about the economic models, you see, because we keep talking about independence, freedom of the media, but not until we link it up with the economic independence, really we will not be making any headway. Because there are people working in media houses now who are not being paid. They are relying on the very things we are saying is unethical, in going to assignments and trying to hope that the organizers would give them something. So the media themselves have to be alert to it and realize that the media has changed. It's now business. So infuse business models with the practice of journalism. And the media sometimes resist it. I have been involved with an organization where the manager of the media organization is coming from a purely economic background. So she wants to instill some purely economic models into the business. And then you have the media thinking that, hang on, this is not any type of business. Don't come and start going into our editorial. And that is a challenge. So that is why we have introduced media management, where you need to have an idea of how the media is and realize that it is not any type of business. And you also have to realize that the media has changed, and you can't continue operating in the way you used to operate it 20, 40 years ago. If you do that, you will continue being on your knees, and you will be at the beck and call of the political actors. And as soon as you start doing that, they won't respect you. And that is where then you become really unprofessional. And when you become unprofessional, nobody takes you serious.
Wow, wow. So journalism is a profession, but not all journalists can afford to be professional. Shocking. All right, well, we're going to talk a bit more about this, but first I want us to view this. We asked a few members of the public what they expect, you know, from journalists in terms of professionalism, and when they switch on the TV or the radio, how do they expect journalism to further democracy and aid elections? Let's check out what they had to say.
We keep watch of activities, the fact that we are able to report the good and the bad aspect of the society as a whole, and not in terms of government. In terms, I mean, they say media, radio, TV get results, and for some time now, I mean, it hasn't been good. It hasn't been so good, but we are trying as a media.
What do you expect the media to do in order to make our democracy better?
I think in the aspect of politics, the media shouldn't just report. media should make sure you go deep down to the extent that we get results. Let's not report the issues, discuss the issues on our radios, on our morning shows, and leave it like that. Just as the way it's been. It's been a talk shop over the period, and we are just talking. We deliberate on issues, but it's more or less like we are giving complaints, criticizing people. But some of them that are very pertinent, media should be able to go deep down so we'll get results. We couldn't do anything because let's not just limit media to news. I mean, media is entertainment, media is love, media is everything. So if there was no media, I mean, we can't do much. It will be like a dead world.
I would say it's good. All I would say.
What do you think the media should do in order to improve democracy in the country?
Okay, well, they should seek more of the truth. The truth, yeah. They should sell more of the truth. Delve deep into what the relevant matters that the populace would like to know. And then also be informed so that they can also inform us, the individuals who do not have much of the strength to reach out to this information that they get.
All right. What would we have done as a country without the media?
Well, even as they are here, we're still not even getting much. So if they are not, I would say that it would have been very bad. It would have been very bad. We are looking at the illiteracy rate in Ghana and even Africa as a whole. If the media was not there, I think most of it would have been deceived in a way.
Well, if I should say, there's an influx of information now to the public, so probably I think the media is doing very well to actually promote information and make information to us very timely. I think it's quite okay now.
All right. Any room for improvement?
There should be rooms for improvement actually, because you cannot operate at 100% every time. So probably, I think for now we should just do very well to kind of, should I say, put everybody involved in disseminating information.
All right. What do you think the media could do better in order to improve the democracy of the country?
For now, I think they are doing very well with how they are conducting themselves. So I think that is okay for now.
I think the media is doing much well in the country. As a matter of fact, some of us, we find ourselves in a place that is hard to us to even come to the city. But with the help of the media, we're able to get whatever is going on in the country. And I think the media, the work of the media is really, really helping the country. And as a matter of fact, there are some points that the media has to realize before they contact people. They are most of the times unaware. The media will just come and capture whatever you are doing and they will broadcast it. I think that is the aspect the media has to work on it. Before they even come out with anything of a person, they have to consult the person before they come out with it. So that is the only point the media has to work on it. In general, I think the media is doing their best. I think one of the things that they will do to improve democracy is to let the people know their rights, their do's and don'ts of the country. They should also improve. Well, as a matter of fact, this country, looking at the literacy rates, a lot of people are illiterate. So they need to calm down, educate the people to know their do's and don'ts and of what it takes to be in a democratic country. So I think the media has to educate the people. That's the most important thing. I think we wouldn't have even gotten that way. We would have been family ourselves. We didn't know our left or right. I think without the media, no. The country wouldn't have gotten to this peak as a country.
Views of some Ghanaians there on what the country would be like without a free press. But of course, with freedom comes responsibility. So let's talk a bit more about that and how the press is making use of that responsibility. Let's focus a bit more on the concept of democracy and how the media is supposed to further it. Now, we've already highlighted what the problems are, and not least of which is the economic situation. But what can we do with what we've got? Looking at our current situation as a nation, looking into the future, and the fact that an election is coming up in less than 2 years now. Yeah, how should the media be positioning itself to do better than we've ever done in the past?
Yeah, you see, the orthodox way of doing media work, which is just coming to report, he said this, he said that, is a thing of the past. Now there is even advocacy media. There is media for social change and social justice. So the media now has to take a stand. You are part and parcel of the community. When things go right, it affects you. When it goes wrong, it affects you. So the media cannot afford to just put things out there. One of the people who was interviewed said that, you know, this whole idea of putting information out there and we all go to sleep, the politician has realized that. They are taking advantage of that. They will say, well, if you are 1 week pen, yeah. But one of the news values, which we really, really don't hammer on, is continuity. Continuity is one of the high news values. And when you do that, I mean, you know, on the corruption watch that we do, one of the P's is persistence. And you know how that is putting people under pressure. So when we put information out there, we just don't put it out there and let it go. We need to pursue it and make sure that we are achieving results. If somebody has to be punished, the person is punished. If it was as a result of a loophole in policy, let's ensure that we lobby and advocate for that policy to be changed. When we do that, and then coming at the back of, especially going into elections, when sometimes we see two politicians, sometimes I watch you at home and you bring NDC, NPP, and you know what is going to happen? There's no way they're going to agree on matters. And so sometimes they will churn out their own facts. When the real facts are out there, the media has a responsibility to fact check it and put it out there. Irrespective, it matters not who is going to be embarrassed. We're not there to please anybody. We are there to appeal to the public, to work for the public. So sometimes we need to go beyond that. But that means that putting resources at the disposal of the media, because these things comes with resources. And that is why I keep saying that we need people who are managing the media houses, who have an appreciation of how the media is and how they also make money. So that when the media personnel go to them and say, we need money to do this, to do that, they wouldn't think that, well, but why do we need it? Because it is going to come down to that. If you don't have the resources, the politician will come and put out half or sometimes even absolute falsehood there and knows that you can't expose him. But if you have the resources and there you can do a fact check and put it out there, you realize that when they realize that, okay, now whatever I put out there, I will be caught up. I mean, we would have some decency in the way we do things. And I'm sure, as Mr. Asibe said, when you look at from 1992 up to the last election we have, almost every election we've seen an improvement. And that has been by and large because of the way the media ups its game. And that is what I expect going into the 2020 elections, because it's going to be one of those interesting elections and we don't have to really sit down and wait for the occasion. We need to start preparing and look at what are some of the pitfalls that we had in the previous elections, how are we going to go them better. And I think increasingly when we do that, we're only going to enhance the democracy that we had always been enhancing.
Well, I think that the lawyer had said it all. We need to get to the point where we move away from the he said and they said, where it is what the politician says that is, you know, gospel truth. We need to get to the point where we do a lot more data journalism going into the future, where we're using empirical evidence, you know, to be able, so that the general public would then be able to appreciate what actually is the truth, what is the fact, you know. So we need to get to a point where somebody would decide to say, let's take all manifestos, you know, that, you know, the two parties have given us from the time, you know, we started 92. How much of that, you know, have turned into, when they won power, has turned into policy? How much of that have actually, when you take their budget, have found their place in their budget? How much of that in their budget have actually been implemented? So that, you know, media has gotten to a point where if you're just reporting what is historical, because bear in mind, the politicians themselves now also have their own social media pages, they have their own blogs that they are putting their news out. So if you are waiting for them to say it before you then come to repeat it, you know, that is gone already. But now we need to be doing predictive news that is based on empirical facts. So you can, you know, you have journalists who would study what the patterns have been and then be able to tell you that based on this, and you need to be very transparent about it when you're doing it. That what is your basis of making this particular judgment, and put it out there so that the general public would also be able to make, their decisions. Then critically about that is the fact that in the Constitution in Chapter 12, the media is supposed to hold government to account of the people. So we need to actually hold government to account of the people. We need to up our game when it comes to our investigative reportage, so that we can do the investigation and put the data there. And I agree with, like when he talks about our consistency, I call it the dog and, red meat syndrome. And that's what now we've become as journalists. They know that when we take these particular issues, they all just have to throw, we have a big juicy bone we're chewing, but they just have to throw some other red meat. We'll drop that one and go and take, the small red meat, the curveball that they've thrown at us. Take the example of even Galamsey. We started very well, we've been pushing it, but at some point we've all dropped it. We need to put pressure, and it is the reason why we need to ensure. Because a typical example is the issue of Aisha Wan. Because at that point, she was not one of those victims who were in the pit. This is somebody who has been at the height of it. Previous governments, she's defied all odds. This current government, she's defying all odds. And then, the case goes to court, Nolly Prosecutor is done. This is what's happened. And I'm beginning to see that, the statement of the senior minister, the statement of the Minister of Lands, we're beginning to drop it. But as we speak, other Chinese are still being arrested. Other foreigners are being arrested. I think between January to April, about 70 foreigners have been arrested. Where are they? What has happened to them? Are we still deporting them? Whilst we have a Minerals and Mining Act that has stipulates punishments for foreigners. So this is what journalism has to be. We need to take the issues and really interrogate them and put the hard and cold facts out there and be able to use that to help people tell the stories. Because the business models that would win. Also, unfortunately, it's not that they said business models. If people know that you can even take data that is available and be able to tell us that based on the way the rainfall patterns have been, we know that when it rains, the next time people are going to die here. And so people are able to take their decisions on how that is done. Those are the media houses that people are going to follow. So we would expect going forward, apart from what lawyer has said, is that definitely our whole issue about investigative journalism, we need to be able to up that. And then we also need to give a voice to the unheard, so that they also would be able to articulate what their issues are. Because the politicians also need to hear what it is that the general public also have, the citizens also have to say, so that it also helps to shape, the ideas going forward. And I agree also with lawyer when he talks about the fact that it's this time journalism, we need to be able to take a stand. We need to be able to take a stand for Ghana. When issues come and they concern our country, we need to be able to take a stand. And as going forward as well, we also need to cultivate other voices. We have allowed the space to be captured by the politicians. Sometimes they become victims of it. So whilst professionals are the people who are letting us down, I've not seen any road certificate that has been signed by a politician before. They are all signed by my colleague engineers. And when all those failings happen, we rather will go and talk to the politician. So we need to also start putting, the civil servants, the public servants, the professionals on the line, and we need to start cultivating new voices so that, we need to start hearing refreshing different people who are speaking, who are experts to be able to solve this problem. Unfortunately, internationally, globally, it's a zero-sum game. The Chinese will take advantage of us to their advantage, and I don't fault them. What are we doing as well to be able to take advantage of the situation globally so that we also can win? Because there are sometimes that some of the news that we put out ourselves in the we do that to disadvantage ourselves as a country, and we've gotten to a point where journalism, journalists also need to appreciate the fact that in the global world, we're competing for, markets, we're competing for investment. So what do we do? I'm not saying we should, clean up the rot when they are happening, but what do we do to also put out the good things that are happening, so that we also can get opportunities to be able to get our people to thrive? Because currently the wars we're dealing with is squalor, it's disease, it's filth, you know, it's poverty, it's illiteracy. And what are we doing to be able to make sure that the general public would also be able to survive? So, you know, that is a critical part that we need to play going into the next election, letting people know that who has the best opportunity. Because bear in mind, any election is just like an interview process. We're going to recruit the best chief executive for Ghana. So who is the best person to be able to do that? As media, we need to be able to push that a lot more.
And you know, raises very interesting concept of predictive journalism, where, you know, do the work in advance, empirical evidence, and tell us what will happen. Now, one of my producers, who obviously hearing this realized that yes, this will be the kind of job that will fall on his lap, him and his colleagues, is asking a very important question, that resources and time are limited, and news is created every day. We're chasing after events as they occur with the limited resources we have. I mean, realistically, how can we task a media house, a radio station in Kufuridia, for example, to set aside time and resources to do some of this, you know, predictive work? Is it a realistic expectation that we can have of Ghana's media without constraints?
No, of course, you have to do things as they say, you cut your code according to your size. You need to look at your resources. So the resource constraints would determine what you're going to take on, when you can take on. But if you look at the model that, for instance, Corruption Watch is using on investigative, is a relationship between the media and then the civil society to use investigative journalism to expose corruption. And that is why I think that if we're able to start cultivating this, especially community journalism, because where we have the problem, the vulnerability, the very vulnerable people are in the rural areas, and that is where sometimes we don't really take things serious. But you have community media that can use community media to empower them. They don't have the resources because they don't make any profits. But if we understand how these things can work, where civil society organizations can team up with some of these people, you can always do that. Of course, the media too should realize that sometimes that is the challenge. You need to look at your resources and determine what you prioritize. But because we are in this business of wanting to be first with the news, we are spreading ourselves too thin. But you don't have to. You see, yes, there is competition, but the competition can be done without, not at the expense of the little resources that you have. So you need to look at an issue that you really can pursue, and it would generate you some sort of leverage and all those things. Now, Mr. Shigbe was talking about, if you look at manifesto, 3 years ago when I was teaching political communication, I took the manifesto of the two main political parties, and I said they should analyze, looking at instances of propaganda in it. And almost about 70% was full of propaganda. And what were the propaganda they used? And they use them till date. It's glittering generality. We have created an enabling environment. What does that mean? Or two of the lesser evils. Oh yes, the NDC did it, so we also did it. Or pinpointing the enemy. When you look at it, that is what is there. So if we do some of this, as Mr. Shigbe is saying, when we look at these things, analyze them. See, when you take just one story, it would last you for about a month, 2 months, where you're coming out with different angles and all those things. So I think we just have to appreciate that journalism has changed. And now, because of the advent of social media, people have avenues to actually look at information from different sources. So you need to do things differently. If you do things differently, people are making money. And you see, we are not being creative in the way we generate resources. We don't diversify our source of income. Just in the internet alone, the amount of money you can make, but you can't make those things if people don't take you serious. So that is where I keep saying that the professionalism is what would enhance our ability to generate more resources by diversifying our source of income. But I think that you are absolutely right. We need to be practical and realize that we can't be running around chasing almost every lead when you don't have the resources. When you do that, you're going to falter. But I think that we have to do everything we can to protect investigative journalism in this country. It is true that some of the methodologies that have been used by some of our investigative journalists has raised some eyebrows. But compared to what we would have if we don't use those methodologies to expose wrongdoing in society, I would always go for that, until we come to that stage where we all find a better model of doing that. And that is why I have to say it here, I am really, really worried about the trend I have seen where some of our celebrated investigative journalists are almost being brought to their knees by government. Government must create a conducive environment for the journalists to do their work. And I am worried when I see government dragging government as an institution, dragging media personnel to the regulator. I think it is an indirect way of trying to achieve what the Constitution says we shouldn't do in Chapter 12. And I think it's worrying. Individuals can do that, but not government. I think that is a very worrying trend.
That's an interesting point you raised, because I was going to ask next about how we check the media. How can we use institutions, regulations, and so forth to make sure that the media does the very best job they possibly can? And this point here feeds right into it, because there are some who would say, well, especially reading the Afrobarometer report, there are some who say, well, yes, I mean, government has to be able to check journalists if you get it wrong. So why not take them to NMC? Why shouldn't the entire government take one journalist to NMC, to check him, make sure that
See, my worry with that, you see, and there's a big worry, is the fact that at this particular point in time in our life, the reason why your worry has massive credence is that you have the chairperson of the Media Commission being a representative of the president. Yeah. And for me, it sins against the spirit and the letter of our Constitution. It is an issue that it has been agitating my mind when that happened, that this is an issue that maybe we should go to court to really test it. That when the Constitution talks about insulating, the media from governmental control, it also talked about the fact that you could have, because this one, it's a representative of the president, who is currently now the chairperson of the Media Commission. And so when you do that, are you really creating that insulation? And then and when you now have the government take the, well, I'm not too sure whether I would worry too much about they taking. If the Media Commission was independent, then it doesn't matter if the government decides to bring, a journalist to the Media Commission. Because for me, I think it's a forum that we should use a lot more. My worry in this particular case, and I'm hoping that in terms of the paneling for this particular case, the multimedia case that the government has taken multimedia to, the chairperson of the Media Commission, who is government representative, would not sit on the panel. Neither would he sit on plenary when these issues come up, because it's an anathema, for us to have the case that this institution that is supposed to create the insulation is currently now being headed by the president. I know the president is a doyen of free speech, but you see, when we are creating systems, we don't create them for individuals. No. Yeah. You're not creating them for President Anado, who has pushed for this thing. You are creating it for the devil, who would come one day and be able to use it. Can you imagine if the chairperson of the Media Commission decided now that I was taking a decision which the government thought was on its initiative? You know what the president can do? He can decide that I am pulling that person out. Yeah. So the thought of the fact that the president can pull you out, can change you anytime as his representative, would definitely weigh on any ordinary human being. And I'm not talking about the person of Yao. It's not about Yao. It's about the fact that we need to create a system that is truly independent. And I think that this is something that, as Ghanaians, we need to take to the Supreme Court and really test it, that whether this is what it ought to be. And all of this, feeds also into how we regulate the media. I prefer this one of taking to the Media Commission than doing the Kwasi Binti, where, media houses have been under a lot of strain. You have had, politicians, people who sometimes were in power. They take media houses on and they are fined. So you take the issue of, the Kwasi Binti issue. That fine of how many, 300 or something thousand CDs, how many media houses? Except collapse media. You've had situations where, when I was at Graphic, people had taken us to court, and the fines that now were coming out. So these were some of the ways in which we suppress media freedoms, But so that's why, for me, I want the Media Commission. We should rather use a lot more of the Media Commission, but it should be seen to be independent. And I'm also very worried. I think, in as much as the theme is what we're focusing on, I'm surprised that we only fell by 4 places. And I think it's also because a lot of the attacks on journalists are not actually reported. As we speak in 2018, it's been terrible. Yeah. To the extent that we actually have lost a life. And even in losing this life, what is happening? We don't even know what is happening to the investigations. And journalists, I hear us, we're talking about kidnapping, bring back our girls. What hashtag is currently running on any media house to say, find the killers of Ahmed? We sometimes as journalists also are our own enemies. We don't follow issues that are concerned.
Indeed, and I wish we could go on and on with this.
I know.
It's an important conversation, but
yeah.
I'm going to have to say a big thank you to the both of you. Wow, this has been enlightening, and we need to keep this conversation going. That's perhaps one of the big takeaways from what you've said, that we can't let these things die in a week. We need to keep talking about it. So thank you both. Ken Ashigbe, of course, CEO of Ghana Chamber of Telecommunications and former boss of the graphic communications.
Former boss of this place.
Yes, indeed. Let's not forget that. Yes. Our former boss right here, yeah. And of course, Zakaria Tanku Musa, who is a lecturer and a lawyer, and a lecturer at the Ghana Institute of Journalism. It's been an honor. We appreciate it. Right, now coming up, International Needs Ghana has successfully gone through an assessment by the African Council for Accreditation and Accountability. That's a Pan-African Independent Christian Accreditation body. Now, they are the first organization to be accredited by AFCA in Ghana. We'll find out why that's important next.